This is Betty Jackson. This is my full-time grandmother, my great grandmother, Betty Jackson. They got her being born. She was a slave. They got her being born around 1793 to 1870. She was purchased by her and her mother, Hannah, was purchased by Andrew Jackson in 1794. And Andrew Jackson purchased her, her mother, her brother, and I think her sister. My five-time grandmother, which is Hannah, which is Betty Jackson's mother, they got her being born in 1770. She died in 1846. 76 years she stayed in slavery. She didn't get a dime for her labor. For 76 years, she didn't get paid for her labor, nor did her kids. No land, no house, no clothes, no food, nothing. Nothing. Now, my full-time grandmother, Betty Jackson, she married my full-time grandfather, Ned Jackson. And they had a son named Alfred Jackson. And this is who you see in these pictures right here. He was born in 1812 and he died in 1901. And here's the kicker. He never left the plantation. Actually, he's buried on the plantation with his former slave masters. He never left. That's a whole nother story of itself. But anyway, he married my three-time grandmother, Gracie Bradley. You can tell by the death certificate, they got her birth around 1815, and she died in 1887. That'll make her 72 years old when she died. She was purchased in 1832. Not only was she purchased, but her mother, which is my full-time grandmother, Nancy Hibb, and two more of her daughters was purchased. Gracie Bradley and Alfred Jackson had two children, Augustus Bradley and Sarah Bradley. Augustus Bradley is my two times grandfather, and he was born in 1831, and he died in 1908. And this is who you see in these pictures right here. He was 87 years old when he died. He spent 35 years in slavery. Augustus Bradley married Kate Dotson Bradley, my two times grandmother. She was born in 1852. She died in 1925. She spent 13 years in slavery. She was 73 years old when she died. Together, they had 9 children. And their name was Mary Bradley. She was the oldest. She was born in 1869. Augustus Bradley, Sarah Bradley, Lizzie Bradley, Alfred Bradley, Nathan Bradley, who is circled on there. That's my great grandfather, and George Bradley, and Joseph Bradley, and Moses Bradley. Remember Joseph Bradley. Remember that name. And these and them are their kids right there. Real quick, this is the death certificate of Augustus Bradley, my great-great-grandfather. And as you can see, they got him down as being 87 years old. He was a farmer. And his son, Joseph Bradley, is the one that signed on the ticket, on the death certificate. Also, his father's name is on there, Alfred Jackson, which link us back to the great Alfred Jackson, my great-great-grandfather. And this is the death certificate of my great-great-grandmother, Kate Bradley, which is the wife of Augustus Bradley. And as you can see, she was a housewife. She was 78 years old when she died. She died in 1925, and her mother and father is unknown. And as you can see, her son, Joseph Bradley, is the one signed on her death certificate. So through this union, they had 9 children. Augustus and Kate Bradley had 9 children. And as you can see, the one that's circled, Nathan Bradley, is my great-grandfather. And this is Nathan Bradley's death certificate. And as you can see, it has that he died in 1950. He was born in 1886. He was 64, 65 years old. They got it on there as 55. His son, Odell Bradley, is the one that signed for the death certificate. And his parents is Augustus Bradley, and Kate Bradley, which link us back to my great-grandmother and my great-great-grandfather. This is a 1910 census with Gus Bradley in it, and then you see my great-great-grandmother, Kate Bradley, his wife is in there, and her son Moses, and their son Joseph is in the household with them. Also, his wife Avery Cockrell is in the house with them. And if you see in this 1910 census, it's some Cockrells in there too, and they also some kin of us. This is the marriage certificate of my great grandparents, Nathan Bradley and Gemma Anna Swingley Bradley. They was married in February 16th, 1910. And she was born in 1891. And through this union, they had 6 kids. Nate and Gemma Bradley had 6 kids, and their name was Odell Bradley, which is the oldest, Nathan Bradley Jr., John Edward Bradley, which is my grandfather, Samson Bradley, David Bradley, and the only female, Mary Bradley, which is Mary Cockrell Bradley. Now, in this 1920 census, we find my grandfather in the house with his mother and father, his 80-year-old grandmother, who is the wife of Augustus, Kate Bradley. You remember her? Yeah, Kate Bradley, she was Augustus' wife. Both of them were slaves. She was born in 1847. Slavery didn't end to 1865. My grandfather was in the house with her, and he was 3 years old at the time. Now, in this 1930 census, we find my grandfather, John Elwood. He's 13 years old, and he's in the house with his mother and his father. They still living. And he also in the house with his uncle, Joseph Bradley, and his family. And this is a picture of my grandfather, John Edward Bradley. He was born in 1917, and his mother and father was Nathan Bradley and Jimmy Ann Swingley Bradley. And he married my grandmother, Mary Alice Launez, in 1937, January the 9th. She was born in 1920, and she died in 2001. This is the pictures of her that you see right there. Also one with her and my grandfather. This is the marriage certificate, and my grandmother was, I think, 17 at the time, and my grandfather was 20 or 21 at the time. Since she was underage, her father, which is my grandfather, my great-grandfather, Hardest Launez, who is seen on this picture right here. My father was actually named after his grandfather, which is Hollis Launez. And he was born in 1902. He died in 1956. He was born to the parents of William Launez and my great-grandmother, which is Alice Clemens Launez, who I think my grandmother was named after her, and my grandmother's name is Mary Alice Bradley. And John Elwood and Mary Alice Bradley, they got married in 1937. They had 11 children. And Hollis Nathaniel Bradley is my father. And as you can see in this 1950 census, my father, Hollis Nathaniel, who they call Yoga, was 9 years old. And his brother, John T., was 12 years old in 1950. Charles Elwood, my uncle, was 10. And my auntie, Johnny Mae, was 8. And Dolores was 7. And Patricia was 2 years old. They also had 2 more other kids that died. And their name was Janice Lucille Bradley, who died. And the other one really didn't have no name, just on the death certificate is Bradley. And they died. And they was born in 1946 and 1944, respectfully. They had 3 more other kids that's not listed in this 1950 census, which is my uncle Thomas Bradley, which is Quaker, and my auntie Mary Bunchy Bradley, and my uncle Bernard Bradley. My grandparents, who is on this picture here, John Elwood and Mary Alice Bradley, gave birth to my father, who y'all see on this picture right here, Yogi Nathaniel Bradley. He was born in 1940, and he died in 2018. He was 78 years old. He met my mother, who you see in this picture right here, Luvinia Fanning, And they had me out of wedlock. And here I am, standing. My name is Stacy Lamont, also known as Tunde Asa. This is my family roots. So let's do a quick run back. My five-time grandmother, my great-great-great-grandmother, Hannah Jackson, was born in 1770. She died in 1846. She was 76 years old. She gave birth to Betty Jackson, who was born in 1793, and she died in 1870, and she was 77 years old. And she married Ned Jackson, who they gave birth to Alfred Jackson in 1812, and he died in 1901. He spent 53 years in slavery. He was 89 years old. He married Gracie Bradley, who our namesake is from, and she was born in 1815, and she died in 1887. She was 72 years old, and she was purchased in 1832 in the DMV area. And they had my grandfather, great grandfather, which is Augustus Bradley. He was born in 1831. He died in 1918. He spent 35 years in slavery, and he was 87 years old. He married Kate Bradley, and she was born in 1852, and she died in 1925. She spent 13 years in slavery. They had 9 kids. They had my great grandfather, which is Nathan Bradley, and he was born in 1886, and he died in 1950. He was 63 years old when he died. He married my great grandmother, which is Gemma Ann Bradley, and she was born in 1891. They had 7 kids, and they had my grandfather, which is John Edward Bradley. He was born in 1917, and he married my grandmama, which is Mary Alice Larnez, and they had my father, which is Yogi Nathaniel Bradley. And I appreciate everything. Know the stuff that you come from, know the background that you come from, and then you'll understand why things are the way they are. Once we understand the cause, then we can come up with a true solution. Peace, y'all.